All right, Ian, are we good?
Good to go.
All right. Hello and welcome to History of Ocean Protection, Diversity Inclusion, and Lessons for 30 by 30. I'm Virgil Zetterlin, Director of Protected Seas and moderator for this session. Area-based protections got their modern start in 1972 with the Marine Protection, Research, and Sanctuaries Act. Today, the NOAA Marine Protected Area Inventory includes nearly 1,000 individual areas. In the upcoming years, we expect many new areas will be created as the U.S. moves to meet the 30 by 30 target. Our goal today is to provide a snapshot of current U.S. protections, learn how community voices have shaped ocean protection, and review lessons learned on how diversity inclusion can be improved for the benefit of all in planning for 30 by 30. I'd like to welcome our panelists today, Jennifer Sletten, lead attorney at Protected Seas, presenting on current U.S. ocean protections, Calla Allison, director of the MPA Collaborative Network, a long-term participant in the creation and upkeep of California's MPA network, Angelo Villagomez from Blue and Nature Alliance, who has worked tirelessly to help create protected areas in the Pacific and elsewhere. And finally, Shanna Edberg, Director of Conservation Programs with the Hispanic Access Foundation, who will help provide her perspectives on participation of diverse communities in protection planning. During our session, please mute your microphones so that we don't have any accidental noise, and you're welcome to submit questions via the Zoom chat feature, which we'll try and get to after the panelists' presentations. As a note, we are recording this session for rebroadcast, and with that, Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Virgil. Let me just share my screen. Here we go. I assume everyone can see this. Great. Okay, well, thanks again, Virgil, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. My name is Jennifer, and I'm the lead attorney for Protected Seas, and I'm here to talk about the Protected Seas Navigator, which is our tool and map of MPAs and marine managed areas. So our project, the Navigator, started about 6 years ago as a public-private partnership with NOAA, with the intention to fill a gap in regulatory availability for marine protections. And we soon realized that MPAs, of course, are a very important tool, a regulatory tool for protecting marine habitat and species, but there's more out there. There are more regulations out there that provide a conservation benefit, and we saw a lot of use and benefit in including those in our database as well. So for our US data set, we include, of course, NOAA's MPA inventory and all the MPAs in there, but also other types of areas like fishery management areas, water quality areas, speed zones, military areas, and the like. All in all, we have about 4,500 areas in our US data set. So for years now, we've been collecting regulatory information because the actual legal protections in place are really crucial to understanding how protected our ocean really is. This database is an open access resource that is available to the general public. And for the countries we've completed, it provides a comprehensive library of permanent place-based restrictions on marine life extraction and other marine activities. For each area in our database, we cite, review, and summarize the relevant regulatory information. And we also indicate for over 25 different types of marine activities and fishing gears, whether those activities are allowed or restricted or prohibited, or we just couldn't find any information. We also assign a level of fishing protection score to each area in our database, and I'll go into a little more detail in just a moment. So here's a quick example of how this information translates on our interactive map, showing the overlaps that exist in any given spot in the ocean. So on our map, you can click in any spot and see all the overlapping areas that we've gathered, the overlapping fishing regulations and restrictions, and other types of marine activities. So again, if you go to our map, you can do that in any spot and just point and click. So our level of fishing protection score, it indicates how well fishing, marine life extraction, is is regulated, and it goes from 1 to 5, 1 being the boundary we're looking at does not have any special fishing restrictions, all the way to 5. We consider 4 and 5 highly protected from fishing. So 4 is almost a no-take with very few non-intrusive recreational or subsistence exemptions, and 5 is a no-take or no entry. All right, so here's a, a snapshot of the different ways you can look at our data and use our data to kind of assess marine protections that are in place. So first you can choose one of the fishing gears that we code for. So here we've chosen bottom trawl, and we've created this map to show where are prohibitions and where are restrictions on bottom trawling. And you can quickly see that almost 50% of US marine waters are prohibited to bottom trawl, and pretty much the rest is restricted. Now, just a note, when we say it's legally prohibited, that means we're reflecting here what is in the regulation, not what that means in practice. And I'd be happy to answer questions about that during the Q&A if any come up. You can also use our data, you can forget about the boundaries and use our data to look at how protected a given piece of ocean is. So here you have 2 side-by-side hex grid maps. On the left is the maximum level of fishing protection that we've assigned to any given 10 square kilometer hex grid cell on the map. And then on the right, you see the total, the cumulative gear prohibitions in each cell as well. So you can see, if you look at the area in the circle here, there's a patch of light green, which indicates that the highest level of fishing protection assigned to any given boundary that overlaps there is just a 2, which is very low. That means there's maybe 1 or 2 fishing restrictions. But that same area on the right has 4 or 5 different fishing gear prohibitions. So that same patch of ocean is actually more protected than looking at an individual boundary might indicate. Talking about 30 by 30 initiatives, looking at the US, using our level of fishing protection score, according to our calculations, about 26% of US waters are protected from fishing, and we consider that highly protected. Again, that's levels 4 and 5. But if you look at the breakdown by color here, you can quickly see that the main contributor to that is the Pacific area. And we've even broken that down here. You can see over 99% of that 26% comes from the Pacific Islands. So there's a really uneven distribution of the protections in the US waters. At the state level, there are significant differences between federal and state management. So you can see total waters off of California from 0 to 200 nautical miles are just at 0.5%, and the vast majority of that comes from California waters, which is 13.4% protected. Interesting will be whether what we consider moderately protected, so that's a level 3 in our score, if those contribute to the 30%, those are areas that have a significant amount of fishing restrictions, but still allow quite a bit. If those are considered, then California really is well on its way. All right, so to sum up, we believe that our data and our level of fishing protection score can provide a good first glance at how well we're doing at ocean protection. However, there's a lot of progress is still needed. There's still some uneven distribution of protections. And we think that our data can help with 30 by 30 initiatives across all platforms. And welcome any feedback. Please get in touch with me or my team to provide feedback, or if you'd like to collaborate or have a presentation for your organization. Thank you. Handing over to Calla, Allison. Now. Sorry.
I'm just gonna jump in there. Hi, everybody. My name's Calla Allison. I'm the director of the MTA Collaborative Network, and was going to talk a little bit about the role of diverse partners in managing California's marine protected areas network of 124. I wanted to first provide a little bit of a background. I'm going to show a video. So hopefully the tech gods will be with us just to get us started.
think one of the biggest accomplishments of the collaborative network and something we really value is bringing together people that might not have come together otherwise to think about the best way to manage marine protected areas. Bringing the tribes together with agency and enforcement officers, with environmental nonprofits, bringing them together with the fishermen and bringing the scientists too that can share their perspective. Having all those people at the table and having them feel like their voices are heard and that their voices are valued, that is a huge asset that really can't be replicated anywhere else. It needs to be channeled and harnessed and leveraged in a way that can really help fish and wildlife do the best job they can.
I think we all are very, very concerned about the ocean condition. I mean, this is our livelihood. This is what we do for a living. And we certainly do not want to see any damage done to the ocean in any way. There's a way to work around this stuff. Everybody needs a little bit, you know, we need to give and take.
One of the problems we've had historically with resource management is that people tend to work in their own little silo. The scientists work on research and monitoring, enforcement officers just do enforcement, the nonprofits are working on the conservation side, and the fishermen are making a living. And I think it's really important connecting them to the managing agency so they're not all on their own doing separate, disparate things, but they're coming together with the managing agency, doing something that's approved, that can actually be supportive. So there's this top-down, bottom-up where we come together and make very valuable products. We make valuable relationships, and we're actually able to leverage not just the natural resources, but the social resources and the value they bring to the table as well. We want to make sure that they're not paper parks, of course. We want to manage them for the long term. And part of that effort is making sure that we really start enabling communities to become stewards of their MPAs, and hopefully that spreads beyond the coast and becomes a part of who we are, our coastal stewards.
So the Marine Life Protection Act initiative in California, it was considered a huge success because it was so stakeholder driven. I think the big question afterwards was, okay, now what are we going to do once the stakeholders leave and go back to their regular jobs and their other priorities? And Fish and Wildlife is left managing all 124 of these marine protected areas, you know, covering 852 square miles and all the areas in between. Of course, they still have to manage the rest of the California state waters. And it was clear that they needed that stakeholder help, but how to go about getting that, and how do you leverage, you know, all the energy and enthusiasm in the designation process? Would it actually translate in to long-term engagement? And perhaps a bigger question was, would these same stakeholders that are from various backgrounds and most often from opposing viewpoints that weren't always super nice to each other in the designation process, would they actually come together for a common purpose of managing marine protected areas for the long term? And surprisingly, and luckily for us, it was a resounding yes. They did come together with some caveats. Today we have this statewide network of 14 county-based coastal communities that we call collaboratives. They're very different. So it was one of these things where the diversity inside the collaboratives across sectors was very diverse, and then each collaborative was diverse as well. We couldn't use a cookie cutter approach. There couldn't be just this statewide way of managing marine protected areas, because how you go about managing up in Del Norte County or Humboldt County is going to be very different from those urban centers of Los Angeles or Orange or San Diego County. And then the Bay Area is entirely different as well. So it really needed to be locally based approach of looking at how to manage. And when we think about manage, we think about having this comprehensive approach that's localized. So really providing bottom-up input, expertise, and efforts in education and outreach, doing research and monitoring. We really focus on community science, and then enforcement and compliance as well, because we have not very many fish and wildlife officers, but there are police officers, there's county sheriffs, there's lifeguards, there's county rangers, all of those other local resources that we can leverage to assist California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So we have the enforcement officers, the scientists doing research, the fishermen. Probably the biggest strength is our sector diversity of bringing all these people together. And at first it was a little tenuous because of the designation process, but the more they got together, the more they heard each other and knew that they were being listened to, the more success they actually were able to see themselves, that they could provide better resources and better management ideas together rather than separately. And that's probably been the biggest success of the collaborative network. Now we have over 1,000 collaborative members and hundreds of organizations that are represented. But while sector diversity is good, there needs to be more social diversity as well. And we also need to rethink what we mean by a coastal community. So it's not just the people that live and work on the coast. I think that's maybe where we started with looking at stakeholders of marine protected areas, but we need to think broader and think about expanding to inland communities and into communities that have been historically underrepresented in any type of ocean matters, and definitely as far as engaging and having a management voice. So we're working on efforts acknowledging the diversity of California and Native American tribes, and also doing a lot of focused work on non-English speakers, doing translations and thinking about signage and more universal language, and then getting new communities involved in MPA management that might not have had that same history and that same connection over the long term. And all of these diverse voices, I think my biggest takeaway, I know this is a short overview, is just the more diversity we're able to throw at an issue, the more success we had. And it also helps the state. It offsets a lot of the costs that would have to be taken on by them otherwise. And we actually did a study of one of the collaboratives to see what the in-kind value of all these organizations participating was. And it came between $1 and $3 million annually. So if you think about all 14 collaboratives, we're looking at $20 million annually of in-kind support. That would be a lot if the state were just trying to produce that themselves. So there is a social value and there's the monetary value that the collaboratives bring to resource management. And the idea really is just empowering these coastal communities to be involved and to realize that, you know, they're more than a stakeholder. They're part of that community. They're part of what is going to make these marine protected areas work and what's going to make the ocean healthy for them and their future generations. So that's really what we're focused on amplifying and supporting to make California's network successful for the long term. So happy to answer any questions later, but now I'm going to turn it over to Angelo Villagomez. Angelo, you're up.
Helps to unmute your microphone before you start. All right, well, So let's go. So after talking about near shore, smaller protected areas off the West Coast, I'm going to take you further west into the Pacific Ocean, home of the largest offshore marine protected areas on the planet. Hey everyone, my name is Angelo Villagomez. I am a native Pacific Islander, descended from voyagers, raised within a culture whose existence is dependent on the bounty of the ocean, but trained in the scientific method of Western scientists. Hold on, I don't think I'm full screen here, sorry. There, now I'm full screen, right? If you're tweeting this conference, please use the hashtag CHOW 2021, and we have a hashtag just for our session. It's hashtag diverse ocean. You can also tag me at TauTauTasi if you have any questions or comments, and I'll follow up with you afterwards. The Pacific Islands seem isolated and distant to many people across the world. But from the perspective of my people, the Chamorro people, the native inhabitants of the Mariana Islands, the Pacific Ocean isn't the middle of nowhere. It is the center of everything, and it connects us all. I'm here to tell you the story of how Hawaiians and Chamorros, the indigenous residents and longtime owners and stewards of islands claimed by the United States, became champions for vast protected areas stretching across nearly 3 million square kilometers of wild and untamed Pacific Ocean. This is an area larger than all of Alaska and Texas and California combined. The land area, meanwhile, could all fit within the borders of Washington, D.C. I have worked on protected areas in the American Pacific for the last 15 years. I led grassroots efforts to designate and named the Mariana Trench Marine National Monument, worked with scientists and Native Hawaiians to help make the case for the expansion of the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument, and today represent the conservation community on the Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument Advisory Group. And I'd also like to bring a little attention to the large protected area in American Samoa, but I won't be speaking about it because I have no experience there. These regions are home to whales, turtles, sharks, corals, and hundreds of known species of fish. There's a diversity of habitats from volcanoes above and below the water to reefs, atolls, undersea canyons, and the deepest ocean trench on the planet. What may be even more exciting is the unknown life and the discoveries waiting to happen in these places. Some studies suggest as many as 10 million undiscovered species in the unknown reaches of the ocean exist. Scientists have recalibrated their sense of what a healthy ocean should look like because of these protected areas. Studies of the fish species around Palmyra Atoll challenged our assumption of what shark-infested waters really means. When left alone, free from fishing, the numbers of large apex predators, these are groupers, sharks, snappers, and jacks, is exponentially larger than on islands where fishing occurs. Areas like Palmyra Atoll, which remain untouched and free from fishing, provide a modern reference point for a healthy ocean. These studies and others like them form the basis for the scientific knowledge that marine protected areas result in more diverse, healthy, and abundant populations of marine life. Now, the rugged individualism of the American character is built on the notion of the frontier and wilderness. And most Americans accept without question that our national parks protect American wild places and heritage in its many forms. Even if Americans are unable to visit them, just knowing these places exist plays a part in the American identity. The marine monuments play a similar role for the people who call the Pacific Ocean home. We give to America and the world these national ocean parks, and we see it as our kuleana, our duty and our privilege to be its stewards. These Pacific monuments were designated after significant indigenous-led, bottom-up grassroots advocacy that led to top-down decision-making by the President of the United States. Each one was created using the Antiquities Act, the century-old law used by nearly every American president to protect our shared scientific and cultural heritage. Chamorros and Hawaiians and Americans of all backgrounds wrote letters, signed petitions, attended meetings, and even wrote songs about the need to protect these ocean areas. I admit these monuments were not designated without controversy. Decisions made in Washington, D.C. grow increasingly unpopular the further west one travels. And no state is further west than Hawaii. And the territories to the west of Hawaii do not even have a vote in Congress or the power to vote for the president. Some of this criticism was undeserved, however, and I would like to bring attention to that. The industrial fishing fleets based in Honolulu were particularly vocal in their opposition, but in the years since designation, studies out of the University of Hawaii have provided strong evidence that these monuments have improved tuna fisheries in the region. The United States is a shining example of how our ocean can support the world's best managed fisheries and some of the most highly protected ocean sanctuaries at the same time. To quote President George W. Bush, "I know the human being and fish can coexist peacefully." I am reminded that when our ancestors landed on the islands where our people live now, they must have found abundance like that which today only exists on these isolated islands. For most Native people, nature includes people, and we are kin to nature. Another way to understand these islands and their surrounding waters are as time capsules. They are scientific laboratories and cultural artifacts that act as windows into the time before we fished the ocean with the help of satellites. They are a reminder of what much of the ocean used to look like, and they provide hope that with better management and increased protections, what we can restore the ocean to for future generations. Thank you, mahalo, and sijus mase, and I will pass the microphone over to Shanna. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Righty. Hello, everyone. And thank you to all the presenters so far. I'll be adding on to what you've already said by talking about how we can move from ocean protection to ocean justice. My name is Shanna Edberg. I'm the Director of Conservation Programs for Hispanic Access Foundation. We are a national nonprofit with the mission of connecting Latinos to partners and opportunities to improve lives and create an equitable society. I'm actually going to start us off by sharing this quote from one of our network members on the power of the ocean in their life, just to remind us why we love this work and how important the ocean is to all of us. "The depth of my connection is catalyzed within each cellular micrometer of my body. It is transformed with each breath I inhale and with every sip of water I take. The chances I do get to be in the water are more than magic. It is a sense of connectivity and calm, a feeling of peaceful consciousness, respect, curiosity, and fear, constantly moving you further from the problem you face into solutions you may be able to use." And that's from David Riera, a doctoral student in Florida who actually helped organize CHOW this year. Moving on, I'm sure you're all aware of the various threats that are facing the ocean's health, but I want to emphasize how threats to the ocean also represent special threats to Latino and other BIPOC communities. And so on the flip side, ocean protection also helps protect these communities. Our research has found that almost a quarter of coastal residents are Latino. So this is a big coastal population, but unfortunately, due to factors like economic instability, lower access to healthcare, home insurance, disaster messaging, and other resources, this is also an especially vulnerable population to coastal hazards like sea level rise, storms, and flooding. Damaged habitats mean damaged fisheries and reduced tourism, leading to significant job loss, especially for Latinos who make up a large portion of the hospitality and marine construction industries. Beach and fishery closures also disproportionately cause health problems to Latino populations because they are less likely to be aware of these advisories and in some cases rely on fishing for food security. Making the connection to Latinos who live inland, agricultural workers are routinely poisoned by pesticides used for farming, while those same pesticides make their way into rivers and the ocean, where they then cause red tides and dead zones, thus causing the aforementioned advisories and job losses. And of course, the physical health risks are only one part of overall well-being. As has been driven home during the pandemic, the ability to get outside and have access to green and blue spaces is so necessary for mental health. While on the other hand, natural disasters and climate risks can cause depression, anxiety, and PTSD. So, and what's more, access to clean water is also a matter of life and death for Latino and Black children who are more likely to drown due to lack of safe, clean water to learn and swim in, to learn to swim in, as well as swimming lessons. Long story short, Latinos and other underserved communities have a hugely important stake in the health of the ocean. And a healthy, protected ocean has to benefit and include these communities to move toward ocean justice. Because when we don't protect the areas where Latinos and other communities of color live, that has real impacts on these communities' health, homes, livelihoods, and their general well-being and vulnerability to climate change. What's more, protecting more of the ocean means protecting and honoring the diverse history of the US, which includes a lot of Latino history. So here are just a few examples of Latino historical sites on the ocean from around the US. And of course, we must acknowledge that we all live, work, and play on indigenous ancestral lands, and that indigenous cultural connection extends to waters in the ocean as well. I don't have time to dive into any of these Latino ocean heritage sites, but I do recommend you give them a quick Google and go to visit if you can, because they're pretty cool. So what does all this mean for the future of ocean protection and conservation efforts like 30 by 30? It means that protecting the ocean is also a matter of protecting Latino health, heritage, and well-being, and that of other BIPOC communities. If we care about diversity and inclusion, protecting geographically diverse parts of the ocean and the lands and waters that serve and connect these communities is a necessary next step. But it also means that there's a lot more to ocean justice than ocean protection. There's so much that needs to be done. This set of recommendations that I have here might be a little bit more relevant to the nonprofit ocean conservation community. But if there are any elected officials, business, government representatives listening, we would love to work with you, and you better believe I have a set of recommendations for you as well. So yes, we need to designate new sanctuaries in new geographies with effective level of protections that provide meaningful benefits to coastal communities and all of us who depend on a healthy ocean. 2, we need transparent and inclusive planning approaches for coastal land use planning, marine sanctuary creation and management, and conservation action by ocean organizations. Too often, Latino and BIPOC communities are left out because of a lack of education, language accessibility, and appropriate outreach materials. For example, local planning meetings may only be held during work hours, for example, or the platform for submitting comments on an initiative is opaque and not user-friendly. There's 1,000 little issues that sum up to leaving out Latinos and other communities in conservation action and decision-making. Third, we need engagement and educational efforts targeting sectors that are intimately connected to the ocean, but not traditionally involved. That includes defense, hospitality, and agriculture, all of which are more heavily Latino industries. Next, we need to strengthen pipelines for Latinos to work and study ocean conservation, as well as inland conservation. And lastly, for now, support existing organizations and individuals that are already doing this work by connecting them to funding or opportunities and supporting BIPOC-led advocacy and initiatives. If you'd like to know more, you can read Nuestro Océano y la Costa, Latino Connections to the Ocean and Coast, which elaborates on everything I've said here today. And all of our research on Latinos and conservation is available at hispanicaccess.org in English and Spanish. Thank you so much for listening. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I do want to quickly plug that Latino Conservation Week is coming up next month. And it's a really great way to take action on some of the things that I've said today and get the Latino community involved in ocean recreation and ocean conservation. So I encourage you to check out latinoconservationweek.com to learn how to do that. Now I believe we're moving on to Q&A.
Yep. Thank you, Shanna, Angelo, Calla, and Jennifer. Very, very great presentations. So I think maybe to, again, encourage our attendees to submit questions via chat. We may sort of respond to some via chat and others directly in discussion. Threaded through a lot of the presentations, and I think well summarized by Shanna, was the idea of participatory conservation. And I'd love for the panelists to maybe do a bit of maybe discussion or reflection on sort of what that has meant for your work. And I know, Calla, you had mentioned particularly, you know, you have these 14 MPA collaboratives. How do you go about creating a collaborative, or what's that process?
Sure, I can jump into it. I think, you know, and Angelo talked about this a little bit too, is the bottom up is pretty important. So the idea that they're creating this collaboration and involvement themselves, and it's community members reaching out to other community members. And the people that are going to be working together are starting that process. It was important for us for everyone to know it was supported by the state. So supported by also this top-down mechanism and this idea that we were going to meet in the middle. And we aren't just going to be floating out there by ourselves. And it was a process. It took a lot of patience and a lot of listening, because I think, when you have designation processes like this, not everyone's going to get what they want. Some people want more protection, less protection, a different type of protection in a different area, or they feel like their voices really weren't heard. And so acknowledging that and really giving room to voice those concerns at the beginning was necessary before we could start then building positive and new relationships for a whole new way of engaging stakeholders for management looking forward. And just thinking, the more diverse, the better, as far as like, well, should we invite these people? Yes, it should be open to everybody, because everybody has a vested interest in ocean health. So just kind of broadening our ideas of who is a part of that coastal community is important.
I can jump in. On our side, it's a kind of a different type of participation. We need transparency and regulation availability in order to proceed with our database and our tool. So participation means, getting in touch with the relevant managing agencies or finding the people who can help us locate the relevant up-to-date regulations so that our tool can be as accurate and as possible and raise awareness for marine protections.
Angelo or Shanna, any comments?
Yeah, as I've grown in my career, I've learned to keep an eye out for different definitions of conservation success. And I'm seeing lots of names on this call right now, and we have folks from government, we have folks from academia, we have NGOs, and I saw even Uncle Saul from Hawaii joined. And we all hold definitions of conservation success just ever so slightly different from each other. So I for the last 10 years, I've worked in Washington, D.C., and I've gone to other places to conduct conservation. I have to communicate to my bosses the type of conservation that we're achieving. And the way I talk to them is very different from the way that I talk to communities. There's no one right definition of conservation. I think for a lot of folks living out in the islands, for them, it's not about square kilometers. They just want to know, are there fish? And like, if there's a fish on their plate, then conservation has been achieved. So that's the kind of thing that I keep an eye out for the work that I do. And it's been a journey for me to get there, but I'll always try to learn.
Thank you. Shanna, as you've, as your organization is getting more involved in ocean protection, are there sort of examples in other areas where engagement with the Latino community has been particularly successful, or you felt that your organization has been sort of successful breaking into the larger sort of policy regulatory process?
Yeah, sure. And kind of to tie it into what was said in the question earlier, I think being a connector of people and organizations is so much more powerful than it sounds. And we have found that the Latino community needs kind of active outreach and these incredible tools that you all have. They're not necessarily seen without kind of making those connections to the people who need this information. And one thing that we have been able to do in Massachusetts, there's an incredible Dominican community that lives there. And who have generational or even, you know, living memories of growing up so close to the ocean and being able to see the humpback whale migration from where they live now to their homeland in the Dominican Republic. And so again, making that connection to the love that they feel, to the memories that they have, to that cultural experience, you know, then you can talk about, well, and here's what we need to do to make sure that we can keep this like incredible, you know, this incredible biological thing from continuing. And we've also been successful bringing these communities out and teaching them to fish. And again, there's always the opportunity to include some education and engagement in that. And when people go to the ocean, when they go to the beach, they love the ocean. That's, it's just what happens. And if you can turn those emotions into action, I think that's how we can move forward on these issues.
Great. And I, you know, again, I think action's a great key word here. So maybe as we're coming to the close here, maybe I'll give each of our panelists about 30 seconds on that theme. You know, for our general audience listeners, what are some concrete actions that anyone can do to help move our ocean forward?
I mean, it's really easy. We just need to change who we are, what we do, and how we do it. That's all. That was 10 seconds.
I mean, I just want to reiterate what Shanna said. I love it. You know, turning emotions into action is great. And also the value of the connector, you know, the people that are making those connections and going out and getting people. I mean, there's so many people that really want to do something and just don't know how or what or where to start. And, you know, that's just kind of the important first step is going out there and then nurturing that, you know, getting people to find that information themselves or to start talking about it within their communities. So just, I love that concept.
I agree. I think it's all about communication, awareness, talking about how important marine protection is, getting your friends and family on board, and just making it a priority.
Well, I'll explain what I mean by who, how, and what. You know, ocean conservation, it's a very white-dominated space at all levels. You know, I work in Washington, D.C., and as far as I'm aware, there's one other Pacific Islander working for the NGOs in Washington, in Washington, D.C. So, you know, if we want to conduct Pacific Islander conservation, we should have Pacific Islanders on our payroll. And when we have more of these communities on our payroll, they can help us understand if the what of conservation, if we're going after the right what. So in my life, it's been sharks and marine protected areas. And maybe that was the right thing, or maybe it wasn't. I was the only Pacific Islander in DC who was involved in those conversations. Maybe others have other ideas. And that will inform the how. You know, I work for an NGO, and a lot of times NGOs have predetermined outcomes when they go to communities. You know, they want marine protected areas, and it's possible that marine protected areas aren't the right solution for that particular community. You know, we need sort of as advocates, as you know, professional advocates, we need to come to communities with a cafeteria plan of solutions, not just one or two. Is we need to do a better job of understanding what their problems are, what the threats they're facing, and then be able to offer the types of solutions that work using science. And then the communities get to pick what solutions they want, and then the advocates and the NGOs get to help them implement it. And I think that's happening. I do think NGOs are getting better at that.
One thing that we found in certain communities is that maybe they want fewer beach advisory days, for example, where they can't visit or go into the water because it's polluted. And the solution is maybe bigger than conservation and maybe bigger than protected areas. It's really all these different sectors that are contributing to the problem, and all the communities that can contribute to the solution.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And again, thank you, attendees, for attending our session. For links and more information about the material presented today, please visit the Protected Seas booth in the CHOW exhibition lobby, or protectedseas.net. We'll be putting up a chat. We have a CHOW webpage up to link to all this. We'll post the recording of the session when it's available. We'd like to thank our partners at NOAA for their collaboration and the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation for organizing CHOW. Again, a big thank you to our panelists for their dedication to ocean protection and their time today, sharing their perspectives to enhance justice and equity in the ocean and Great Lakes conservation. And we'll let Angelo take us away with the ukulele.
Bye, everybody. Have a great day. Happy World Oceans Day. Hey, Chris.